Hey, what's going on, folks? Today is a very special episode of Consoletronics. Today I want to talk to you about a game I fell in love with back in the late 1990s and still play religiously to this day. I am, of course, talking about the Football Manager series. Check it out, more than 900 other new features. Only joking. Today I'm talking about a game that needs no introduction. I am, of course, talking about one of the seminal video games of the PlayStation era. Final Fantasy VII.
First of all, apologies. I'm doing a Dan Warsock today and recording straight from our televisual. So, fingers crossed, the picture quality is going to be alright and not spoil anyone's viewing pleasure. Now, what can I say about this game? Well, I think the first thing I should probably say is this is not the greatest video game I've ever played. This is the greatest video game I've ever experienced. Those of you who've played this game before know exactly what I'm talking about. Those that haven't don't deserve to call themselves gamers. This is the Citizen Kane of the gaming world. And while there are many games from this period which can lay claim to elevating gaming from the bedroom of children to the living rooms of the masses, few of those titles left such an impression upon the psyche of a generation of gamers, myself included. Yet you only need to go back a few short years before this game's release, and many RPGs of similar standing were unheard of outside of Japan and small hardcore fanbases. Any viewers from the UK watching this that remember Japanese influenced magazines like Superplay, which devoted many pages to Super Famicom RPGs such as Tales of Fantasia, Wonder Project J, Albert Odyssey, and the previous game in this series, Final Fantasy VI, released in the US confusingly as Final Fantasy III, and arguably one of the best games in the series. What you've just witnessed there is one of the many random battles you will encounter in this game. To keep the running time of this video down to a respectable amount, I've edited out all future battles. You won't be missing anything, as like all games which use this system, with the probable exception of Lunar Silver Star Story, the early battles are very, very easy. And while I introduce myself to this intrepid band of heroes, who are going to try to make the world a safer place by committing wanton acts of terrorism, I thought we'd talk about what might have been. Final Fantasy VII, one of the flagship titles of the Sony PlayStation, very nearly was released on the Nintendo 64, back when the machine was still going under the working title of the Ultra 64. This game was announced as an early launch title or early release title, but when Square realised that they'd have to cram this whopping game onto a cartridge, cartridges still being used by Nintendo because they wanted to exert influence over developers, Square decided they'd rather sign a deal with the devil, or Sony as it likes to be known these days, and the game would see a release on the PS1. There was early reports that it may also see a Sega Saturn release, but they were quickly dashed, with Sony buying a majority stake in Square, thus making all future Square RPGs and all future games PlayStation exclusives. One of the reasons why Square would team up with their then biggest rival Enix, which reduced Sony's influence and allowed Square, or Square Enix as it is now known, be a multi-format developer. Here's me talking about what I love about this game, and I've yet to mention the music, the wondrous music. The Japanese truly understood music in video games in a way that we in the West are only just starting to pick up on. And while the graphics in this game are largely the first thing you notice, and many younger gamers, many of whom I know, who I've suggested that they should try this game, they take one look at the graphics and they think, nah. But the music just adds a whole other dimension to this game. Another reason why we have to thank our lucky stars that this did come out on CD and not on cartridge. Oh, and while I'm speaking of music, there's an orchestra which travels all over the world. I forget the name they go under, but they play Final Fantasy music with a full live orchestra. And other video game music as well, but from what I know of, because my sister went to see them, lucky cow, I never got a chance, I was doing something else, but yeah, she went to see them. She is something of a Final Fantasy fan, a later Final Fantasy fan, playing games like 8, 9, she looks at 7 and thinks, nah. Yeah, as a child she completed all the early Pokemon games that I would buy her for her birthday. It's weird when you look back at the history of the RPG genre, especially here in the West. We did see many of the great titles released, usually with a name change and a few tweaks here, especially when it came to releases on the Nintendo. Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest. On the Sega systems primarily you had the Phantasy Star series. But for RPG fans, it truly was the 32-bit era that really did see the big change. Not just Final Fantasy VII, but many of its contemporaries. Games like Wild Arms, Suikoden. While many of them aren't usually talked about in the same breath as this game, they played their part in helping the RPG genre be accepted in the West, not just as an extension to the D&D pencil and paper pushing crowd, but as a legitimate gaming medium in its own right. Sadly, that wasn't always the case.
Let me give you an example of what I mean. This is an old mini reviews booklet that came free with the Video Game magazine back in the very early 90s. As you can see, it covers all the games that were released in the UK and actually worldwide for machines like the NES, Mega Drive, quite a few Mega Drive games as you can see there, Master System. But the one I want to show you is this one. This is before the UK release of the Super Nintendo, so these would be mostly Japanese games. And as you can see there, you've got Actrazia 92%, you've got F-Zero 90%, all games that were available at the time. And you can see there, they're all given scores that you'd say were fair. Then you come to this one, Final Fantasy II, or Final Fantasy IV to give it its proper title. Once again we travel to RPG land, where man looks like refugees from Lowry's paintings, and combat is a highly exciting affair taken in turns by each participant. The intro to this game is pretty good, but the quest itself is dull and tedious. This is best left alone even by RPG fans. Overall 42%. Now, I played through the Final Fantasy IV on one of the PlayStation 1 re-releases, and as much as I enjoyed it, I have to agree with this score. Final Fantasy IV isn't one of the best games in the series, although it does have its fans. But it goes to show you that before the hype machine for Final Fantasy came along, reviews like this were pretty common. And you could say, well, the reviewer probably didn't play through the entire game. Well, this was a highly respected UK magazine, so they more or less probably did. And they did heavily promote Japanese RPGs long before it was fashionable to do so. Well, back to Final Fantasy VII, being one of the biggest releases on the biggest selling games console of the mid to late 90s. Many other magazines wanted to get involved with it. Here's a Final Fantasy Complete Solution Guide, free with Power Station. Another one here. This one was free with, what's that? Total PlayStation Magazine. There were many of these, and I collected nearly all of them, because Final Fantasy VII is one of the largest games that had been released. Lots to collect, lots of materia to find, summons to discover. I wouldn't say they are necessary for the enjoyment of the game, but for people like myself who'd completed it 2 or 3 times, getting one of these guides and going back and finding everything is a must.
And when I say this game is large, I mean large. This game can take you between 60 to 70 hours to complete. Early magazine reviews suggested that there may be as much as 120 hours plus of gameplay. Lots to keep you going during them cold winter months. Early video game RPGs tended to last around about the 20-hour mark, but this game this epic game, and I mean epic. There is so much to do, so much to see, so much to take in. A cast of likeable, memorable characters. Trust me, those hours will seem like nothing. Come the end of this game, you'll be wishing for more. And it wouldn't take long before the sequels. Yes, Final Fantasy VIII. It would be next to impossible to do a gameplay of Final Fantasy VII without mentioning 8. Many people thought wrongly that Square would do something they hadn't done before, and that they would continue with the cast of characters that they'd established in this game. But it wasn't to be. Instead, we got a whole new cast for Final Fantasy VIII and a whole new graphics engine. Now, I went out on day one and bought Final Fantasy VIII on release here in the UK, and I have to say I wasn't disappointed. I loved 8. I thought it was a worthy sequel to 7, and in many ways bettered it. But I tend to be alone in them statements. Final Fantasy VIII is looked upon as kind of the black sheep of the Final Fantasy family. But I am planning to do a little review of Final Fantasy VIII, hopefully in the not too distant future. Videos have been kind of scarce on my channel last couple of months, as I take a couple of hits there from the first boss encounter. Yeah, you don't want to be hitting this guy while his tail is up, because he will hit you back. Unfortunately, the end of this battle is missing. My camera, for some reason, decided it didn't want to take all this in, and the screen goes black, and we come back up here. But needless to say, I looked good. I was looking good. Yep, now we've got a time limit. Time limit counting down before this place erupts. As before, I am editing out all the random battles to try and keep the runtime of this video down a little bit. We're already up. Oh, we're gone 12 minutes already. Bloody hell! Need to get a move on here. But yeah, what I was saying, the sequels. Like I said, I thought 8 was fantastic. I liked it so much that I couldn't wait for the UK release of Final Fantasy 9, so I got it on import. I got a US release, and I have to be honest, I thought Final Fantasy 9 was pants. I don't care what anyone says, that game was crap from start to finish. I've never in my life had to endure a game like Final Fantasy 9. That game was a test of stamina, a test of will. Oh my god, it was awful. It does have its fans. I know there will be some people maybe watching this who will be thinking, you know, that I don't know what I'm talking about, but trust me, that game was diabolical. 10, never really got into 10 either. Yeah, my love of the Final Fantasy series tends to be the first 7, the first 8, if I'm totally honest. I have gone back and played PlayStation re-releases of most of the games. Unfortunately, for some reason, Final Fantasy 3 has always been a bit missing, or missing in action, because Final Fantasy 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6 released on PlayStation 1, WonderSwan, and I think a few other handhelds as well. I think Game Boy Advance probably saw a few releases. But Final Fantasy 3, other than the DS re-release, I'm not really familiar with it being released on any other console other than the original Famicom. Or did it? It may have got a US release. I'm not really all that familiar. I know the big rivals to this game, or at least big rivals to the early Final Fantasy games, was the Dragon Quest series. The name of Final Fantasy famously came from the fact that Square, down on their luck, decided they'd give it one last go, one last game. That's where the name Final Fantasy comes from. The biggest selling game at the time in Japan was Dragon Quest 1. So, Dragon Quest series very much seen as a second best in the RPG stakes, but if it wasn't for it, there would be no Final Fantasy. And of course, now that Square Enix have tied the knot, so to speak, we are seeing more Dragon Quest games. I have limited experience with the Dragon Quest games myself. I had a bash on Dragon Quest 6 on the Super Famicom on a translated ROM I downloaded a few years back. I enjoyed that. Dragon Quest 7 on the PlayStation 1 was terrible, because I played for about 40 minutes. I couldn't believe how bad it was, and I hadn't encountered one single battle. But here we come to probably one of the most famous stars in Final Fantasy VII, young Ares. Now I want to do something I've never done before, and all the times I've played it, I want to pick the top option. I've never done that before. Wow. Is that it? Yeah, if you've never played this game before, picking the bottom option, you will buy a flower offer. But yeah, I think we're going to come to the end of this video now. I've been talking. I mean, I could talk for England if you let me. I could talk for the next half hour plus. But do you know what? I'm not going to. I'm going to put you guys out of your misery. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching this game, or this gameplay of one of the great games, one of the truly great games for any system, for any time. As we're being accosted by Shinra troops. Originally in this game, what I was going to do is I have a whole memory card with just Final Fantasy VII saves from various different times over the years that I have played this game, that I've saved, kept it on one Final Fantasy card. I was going to load up maybe a couple of different parts of the game, maybe even show off a little bit of the last boss battle, or at least showing off of Sephiroth, but that's, I think, is for another time, because right now I'm going to end this video. So thanks for watching. I'll hopefully have some more videos up very soon.